Victoria Blackwell clutched the three small hands tighter as the train whistled its final departure from Silverpine Station. The conductor's voice still rang in her ears, sharp with accusation. "You never mentioned children in your letters, ma'am. Not one child, but three." Mr. Hargrove was quite specific, a wife, not a ready-made family. The mountains loomed around her, indifferent to her plight, as October winds swept across the Colorado mining town, stirring dust into miniature cyclones that danced between weathered buildings. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The platform emptied quickly, leaving Victoria and her triplets, Emma, Charlotte, and Grace, standing alone beside their modest luggage. The 5-year-old girls huddled against her skirts, their identical blue eyes wide with uncertainty. They were too young to fully understand what had happened, but old enough to sense the desperation rising in their mother's chest like floodwater. "Mama, where's the man from the letters?" Emma asked, her voice small against the wind's low moan. "He's not coming, sweetheart," Victoria answered, fighting to keep her voice steady. She'd spent everything, her savings, her late parents' silverware, even her wedding band from her first marriage, to finance this journey west. Thomas Hargrove, owner of a prosperous mercantile and supposedly a gentleman seeking companionship, had promised a new beginning. Instead, he'd taken one look at the children and disappeared back into town without a word. The station master approached, hat in hand, his expression a mixture of pity and discomfort. "Ma'am, I'm afraid we're closing up. Next train east doesn't come through for 5 days." He hesitated. "There's a boarding house in town, though Mrs. Peterson is particular about who she takes in." Victoria nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. 5 days. With funds nearly depleted and winter approaching the mountains, 5 days might as well be an eternity. "Come along, girls," she said, gathering her composure like fragments of shattered glass. "We'll find somewhere to stay tonight." She'd survived her husband's death in the influenza outbreak, the foreclosure of their Pennsylvania home, and the judgment of so-called friends who'd abandoned her to poverty. She would survive this too. The girls helped gather their meager belongings, one trunk of clothes, a small valise of personal items, and the carved wooden box containing their father's pocket watch and photographs, all that remained of James Blackwell. Victoria straightened her travel-worn burgundy dress, secured her hat against the wind, and led her daughters toward Silverpine's main street. They'd taken no more than 20 paces when Charlotte tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, who's that man watching us?" Victoria turned, following her daughter's gaze to a tall figure leaning against a weathered pine at the edge of the station yard. He stood partially in shadow, but she could make out broad shoulders beneath a worn canvas coat, a full beard, and a hat pulled low over his eyes. Unlike the townspeople who'd stared openly at their arrival, this man observed with quiet intensity, unmoving as stone. The girls pressed closer to Victoria, suddenly shy under the stranger's scrutiny. Something about his stillness unsettled her, not threatening but watchful, like a mountain lion assessing unfamiliar creatures in its territory. She tightened her grip on the children's hands and quickened their pace toward town. Silverpine was smaller than Victoria had imagined, a clutch of wooden buildings clinging to the mountainside like survivors of a shipwreck. The mercantile, Thomas Hargrove's establishment, dominated the main street, its glass windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Victoria averted her eyes as they passed, dignity preventing her from glancing inside to see the man who'd rejected them sight unseen. The boarding house proved just as the station master had warned. Mrs. Peterson, a rail-thin woman with pinched features, looked Victoria up and down with undisguised skepticism. "A respectable establishment," she emphasized, eyes lingering on the three identical girls. I don't typically accommodate children. They're disruptive to my permanent borders. They're well behaved, Victoria offered, though her heart sank at the woman's tone. We only need lodging until the eastbound train arrives. Mrs. Peterson's lips thinned further. $3 per night, in advance, for all 4 of you in one room. Victoria's stomach knotted. $15 for 5 nights would leave them with barely enough for train tickets, let alone food. But what choice did she have? They couldn't sleep on the station platform. As she reached into her reticule for the money, a deep voice spoke from the doorway behind them. Mrs. Peterson, these folks will be coming with me. Victoria turned to find the watching man from the station, now standing in the boarding house entrance. Up close, he was even more imposing. Well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broadened by years of physical labor. His beard couldn't hide a scar that ran from his right temple to disappear beneath his collar, and his eyes, startlingly blue against sun-bronzed skin, held the weathered look of a man accustomed to solitude. Mrs. Peterson's demeanor shifted instantly. Mr. Sullivan, didn't expect to see you in town this month. Wasn't planning on it. His voice was rough, as though unaccustomed to use. His gaze shifted to Victoria and the girls, who stared up at him with identical expressions of wonder. These folks were meant for the Crescent Mine. Victoria opened her mouth to correct him. They weren't meant for any mine, but for a marriage that now wouldn't happen, when she caught something in his expression. A flicker of... what? Not quite kindness, but something steady and certain. The Crescent Mine, she repeated, buying time to understand what was happening. My silver operation, he clarified, then addressed Mrs. Peterson again. They'll be staying at my place, just needed supplies before heading up. The boarding house owner's eyebrows shot toward her hairline. At your cabin, but you never... Things change, he cut her off, then turned to Victoria. Wagons outside. When you're ready, ma'am. Victoria hesitated, calculating her options with the swift mathematics of survival. A stranger offering shelter versus 5 days of depleting their funds in town, where Thomas Hargrove's rejection would follow them like a shadow. The man, Sullivan, seemed to read her thoughts. Got a separate cabin for you and the little ones, he added. Used to be the foreman's before I scaled back operations. It's clean, stocked, safer than town. Something in his tone suggested the last point was particularly relevant. Victoria glanced at her daughters, their small faces tired. From the long journey and growing afraid of the unfriendly town, whatever awaited them at this man's mine, it couldn't be worse than their current situation. We appreciate your hospitality, Mr. Sullivan, she said formally, gathering her dignity around her like armor. But I should be clear, we have no connection. And to your mine, we came to Silverpine under different circumstances. Figured as much. He nodded once. Offer stands. Grace, the most outspoken of her daughters, tugged Victoria's skirt. Can we go with the mountain man, Mama? I'm hungry. A ghost of a smile touched Sullivan's lips before vanishing behind his beard. He directed his attention to the child. Got stew simmering back at camp and a cat that's partial to company. All 3 girls perked up at the mention of food and a cat. Victoria recognized defeat when it faced her. Very well, Mr. Sullivan. We accept your kind offer. Outside, a wagon waited, loaded with supplies, sacks of flour and sugar, tools, kerosene, and various sundries. Sullivan helped load their trunk and then, with surprising gentleness, lifted each girl into the wagon bed, where they settled among the supplies with excited whispers about the promised cat. As he offered Victoria a hand up to the seat, she noticed calluses and scars across his palm, evidence of years of hard labor. I'm Victoria Blackwell, she said, feeling a proper introduction was required. These are my daughters, Emma, Charlotte, and Grace. Ethan Sullivan, he replied simply, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. He clicked to the team of 2 sturdy mountain horses, and the wagon lurched forward. As they pulled away from the boarding house, Victoria caught Mrs. Peterson watching from her window, no doubt already composing the gossip that would spread through Silverpine by nightfall. Across the street, a well-dressed man emerged from the mercantile, Thomas Hargrove, she presumed, staring openly at their departure. Sullivan noticed too. "That him?" he asked, voice neutral. Victoria straightened her spine. "Yes, he found our arrangement unsuitable upon arrival." Sullivan made a sound, somewhere between a grunt and a laugh. "His mistake." The simple pronouncement, delivered without flourish or pity, eased something tight in Victoria's chest. She watched the town recede as they climbed a winding mountain road, the girls chattering behind them about their adventure with the mountain man and his mining operation. "Mr. Sullivan," Victoria said when they'd put some distance between themselves and Silverpine, "I should explain our situation more fully." "No need," he replied, eyes on the narrow road. "Town's got 2 kinds of folk, those looking for a fresh start and those looking to profit off them. Figure you're the first kind." "Yes," Victoria admitted, "though I'm afraid I've made a terrible miscalculation. Mr. Hargrove and I corresponded for several months. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He was seeking a wife. I was seeking security for my children. I believe he expected someone without attachments." Sullivan kept his eyes on the road. "Some men can't see value when it's standing right in front of them." The statement hung between them as the wagon climbed higher, the air growing cooler and thinner. Victoria took the opportunity to study her unexpected benefactor more carefully. Beneath the wild beard and weathered exterior, she guessed him to be in his late 30s. His hands on the reins were steady and sure, his posture that of a man, comfortable in his own skin, despite, or perhaps because of, its obvious hardships. After nearly an hour of climbing, the road curved around an escarpment, revealing a view that stole Victoria's breath. The valley spread below them, painted in autumn's fiery palette, with Silverpine nothing more than a cluster of toy-sized buildings beside a silver ribbon of river. But it was the structure directly ahead that captured her attention. Calling. The Crescent Mine, a camp, had been a significant understatement. A substantial log cabin anchored the property, with a smaller cabin nearby, just as Sullivan had mentioned. A barn, workshop, and what appeared to be the mine entrance completed the small settlement, all nestled in a protected hollow with towering pines, creating a natural windbreak. "It's beautiful," Victoria murmured, genuinely surprised. Sullivan shrugged, but she caught a flicker of pride in his profile. "Gets the job done." The wagon pulled into the yard, and immediately a large orange tabby cat emerged from the main cabin, stretching luxuriously before sauntering toward them. Behind Victoria, the girls squealed with delight. "That's Copper," Sullivan explained, setting the brake. "Thinks he runs the place." As if on cue, the cat approached the wagon and meowed imperiously, clearly demanding an introduction to the newcomers. Sullivan helped Victoria down first, then each of the girls, who immediately crouched to greet their feline welcoming committee. Copper, apparently accustomed to being the center of attention, accepted their adoration with dignified purrs. "The smaller cabin's yours," Sullivan indicated, unloading their trunk with ease. "Been empty since Jeffers left last spring. Cleaned it out last week. Had a feeling it might be needed soon." Victoria frowned slightly. "You were expecting us?" "Not you specifically." His expression remained unreadable. "Stage comes through once a month with mail." Heard Hargrove boasting about his incoming bride. Also heard him conveniently fail to mention he wouldn't take to children. Sullivan's jaw tightened. "Wouldn't Be the first time he's made promises he didn't intend to keep. Understanding dawned. You came to the station deliberately. Sullivan didn't confirm or deny, simply carried their trunk toward the smaller cabin. Stew needs stirring. Get yourselves settled. We'll eat in an hour. The foreman's cabin exceeded Victoria's expectations. Though modest, a main room with a stone fireplace, small kitchen area, and 2 bedrooms, it was immaculately clean and thoughtfully prepared. Fresh linens on the beds, firewood stacked beside the hearth, a pitcher and basin on the washstand. Someone, Sullivan himself, she presumed, had even placed a small vase of late-blooming mountain wildflowers on the table. The girls explored their new quarters with bubbling excitement, the trauma of their rejection at the station already fading in the face of adventure. Victoria unpacked their essentials, mind working to process the dramatic shift in their circumstances. What sort of man was Ethan Sullivan? A reclusive silver miner who apparently kept tabs on town gossip, anticipated their abandonment, and prepared a cabin just in case. A man whose scarred exterior suggested violence, but whose actions demonstrated unexpected consideration. The contradiction unsettled her, yet she couldn't deny the relief of finding shelter, temporary though it might be. As promised, Sullivan summoned them for supper an hour later. The main cabin's interior revealed as many contradictions as its owner. Rough-hewn furniture built for utility rather than beauty sat alongside a bookcase filled with well-worn volumes, Shakespeare, Dickens, scientific journals, and mining texts. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, while mining maps and geological diagrams covered another. A desk in the corner held papers in neat stacks, suggesting an orderly mind behind the wild appearance. The promised stew bubbled in a cast iron, pot hanging over the fire, filling the cabin with savory aromas that made Victoria realize how long it had been since they'd eaten properly. Sullivan had set out bowls, spoons, and a loaf of surprisingly fresh bread on a plank table. "It's not fancy," he said, ladling stew into their bowls, "but it'll fill the hollow spots." The meal passed with unexpected ease. The girls, normally shy around strangers, seemed fascinated by Sullivan. Charlotte, the quietest of the three, actually volunteered information about their train journey without prompting. Emma complimented the stew with the solemnity of a seasoned critic. Grace, always the boldest, peppered Sullivan with questions about mining, the mountains, and especially Copper, who had claimed a place of honor on a chair near the fire. Victoria observed the interaction with growing curiosity. Sullivan answered each question patiently, his responses simple but never condescending. He spoke to the children as people deserving of respect, not nuisances to be tolerated. When Grace asked to see real silver rocks, he excused himself briefly, returning with 3 small specimens that caught the firelight in mesmerizing patterns. "One for each of you," he said, distributing the treasures. "These are special ones, got what miners call picture silver. See how the veins make patterns? Like nature's drawing." The girls clutched their gifts with reverence, thanking him, with synchronized politeness that made Victoria's heart swell with pride despite their circumstances. As the evening progressed, Victoria's exhaustion became increasingly difficult to hide. Sullivan noticed immediately, rising to his feet. "You folks have had a long day. Best get some rest." He walked them back to their cabin, ensuring the fire was properly built before bidding them good night. When the door closed behind him, Victoria leaned against it, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. From the anticipated security of marriage to abandonment to this bewildering rescue, all in the span of hours. "I like him, Mama," Emma declared, already in her nightgown and climbing into the larger of the 2 beds that the triplets would share. "He's like a bear in the stories, but nice." "His face has hurt marks," Charlotte observed quietly, "but his eyes are kind." "And he gave us silver," Grace added, placing her specimen carefully on the small table beside their bed. "Do you think we can stay forever?" Victoria's throat tightened. "We'll only be here until we decide our next steps, darlings. Mr. Sullivan has been very generous, but this isn't our home." "Why not?" Grace persisted with a child's stubborn logic. "It has beds and a cat, and Mr. Sullivan makes good stew." "It's complicated, sweetheart," Victoria managed, tucking them in with practiced efficiency. "Now sleep. We'll talk more tomorrow." When the girls finally drifted off, Victoria sat alone by the fire, turning their situation over in her mind. In the quiet stillness of the mountain night, she allowed herself to acknowledge the full weight of her predicament. Her funds would barely cover return train tickets to Pennsylvania, where nothing awaited them but the same desperate circumstances they'd fled. Staying in Silverpine seemed impossible after Thomas's public rejection. The neighboring towns might offer opportunities, but getting there with 3 young children and limited resources presented its own challenges. And what of Sullivan? His motives remained unclear. Kindness to strangers was rare enough in the world, Victoria knew, particularly from a man who by all appearances valued solitude. Yet he'd prepared for their arrival, anticipated their need, offered shelter without conditions. She was still pondering these questions when a soft knock at the door startled her. Sullivan stood outside, a worn, leather-bound book in his hand. "Thought the little ones might like this," he said, offering her the book. "Belonged to my sister. Fairy tales and such. Illustrations, too." Victoria accepted the unexpected gift. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." He shifted slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the gratitude. "One more thing regarding your situation." His eyes met hers directly. "I've got work that needs doing around here. Cooking, mending, keeping accounts in order. Been managing alone, but it's not efficient." Victoria tensed, suspecting where this conversation might be heading. Many job offers to desperate widows carried expectations beyond household duties. Sullivan must have read her expression. "Separate cabins, proper employment," he clarified quickly. "You and the girls get room and board plus wages. I get hot, meals and clean shirts. Simple arrangement until you decide your next step." The offer hung between them, utterly unexpected, yet offering a potential solution to her immediate dilemma. Employment would allow her to rebuild their savings, consider options beyond a hasty retreat east or another desperate marriage arrangement. "Why?" she asked finally. "You don't know us. We could be anyone." Sullivan's weathered face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, a memory perhaps, or an old wound. "Had a sister once. Husband died in the war. 3 children of her own." He glanced toward the girl's bedroom door. "Nobody stepped up when she needed it. Figured maybe the scales need balancing." The simple explanation carried the weight of unspoken grief. Victoria recognized it immediately, the particular burden of those left behind to mourn, to survive, to rebuild from ashes. "What happened to her?" Victoria asked softly. "Your sister and her children." Sullivan's jaw tightened beneath his beard. "Consumption took her. Children went to different relatives. Haven't seen them in 15 years. He cleared his throat. "It's just a job offer, Mrs. Blackwell, nothing more. Think on it tonight. Let me know in the morning." With that, he retreated into the darkness, leaving Victoria with the unexpected offer and the leather-bound book of fairy tales, evidence that beneath the rugged exterior of Ethan Sullivan lay a man who remembered a sister's children and understood that stories might comfort 3 little girls far from home. Victoria slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with train, whistles, and Thomas Hargrove's rejecting face. She woke before dawn, the mountain air crisp and sharp in her lungs as she stepped outside to gather her thoughts. The eastern sky had just begun to lighten, painting the surrounding peaks in shades of lavender and rose. In that perfect stillness, with her daughters sleeping safely behind her, Victoria allowed herself to consider Sullivan's offer objectively. Employment, real, dignified work with fair compensation, was rare enough for a woman in her position. Combined with safe lodging for her children, it seemed almost too fortunate. Yet Sullivan himself remained an enigma. A silver miner who read Shakespeare and remembered his sister's favorite book, a solitary man who'd prepared a cabin for strangers, a scarred exterior that concealed... what exactly? The main cabin door opened and Sullivan emerged, apparently unsurprised to find her awake at this hour. He carried 2 steaming mugs, offering one wordlessly as he joined her at the rough-hewn railing that overlooked the valley. "Coffee," he explained unnecessarily. "Not as good as you'll make, I'd wager." The implication that she'd accepted his offer hung unaddressed between them. Victoria sipped the strong brew, gathering her thoughts. "If I were to accept your proposal," she began carefully, "I would need certain assurances. The girls' education must continue. I've been teaching them myself, but they'll need proper materials." Sullivan nodded. "Town has a school. Teacher comes up the mountain once a week for the mining families. Could arrange for her to include your girls." "We would require some privacy. I appreciate your generosity, but we've been independent." "Cabin's yours," he interrupted. "Door has a lock. I don't intrude where I'm not invited." Victoria studied him over the rim of her mug. In the soft dawn light, Sullivan appeared less formidable than he had the previous day. Still imposing, certainly, but the hard edges seemed softened somehow. "And our arrangement would remain professional," she pressed. "I've had my fill of marriage schemes, Mr. Sullivan." Something like amusement flickered across his features. "Not looking for a wife, Mrs. Blackwell. Just hot meals and clean laundry." Relief mixed with an unexpected twinge of something Victoria refused to identify. "Very well," she said, straightening her shoulders. "We accept your offer of employment, with the understanding that it's temporary while we determine our future course." Sullivan extended his hand, as he would to a male business partner. Agreement sealed. Victoria took his calloused palm, the handshake brief but firm, a contract between equals. As the sun crested the eastern mountains, illuminating the crescent, mine in golden light, she allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. Not the future she'd planned, certainly, but perhaps the detour they needed. Behind them, the cabin door creaked open, and 3 tousled heads peered out, followed immediately by an imperious orange cat who'd apparently spent the night with his new admirers. "Mama!" Grace called, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Copper says it's breakfast time." Sullivan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Cat runs a tight schedule," he remarked dryly. "Best not keep him waiting." As Victoria turned to hustle her daughters back inside to dress, she caught Sullivan watching them with an unreadable expression. Not quite longing, not quite remembrance, but something between the two. For the first time since arriving in Silverpine, she wondered if perhaps they weren't the only ones who'd been given an unexpected second chance. The following days established a rhythm that surprised Victoria with its naturalness. She took over the kitchen in Sullivan's cabin, transforming basic provisions into proper meals. The girls adapted to mountain life with the resilience of youth, exploring their surroundings under Sullivan's watchful eye, while Victoria tackled the accumulated domestic neglect of a bachelor's household. The work was substantial, mending, cleaning, organizing, but Victoria found unexpected satisfaction in bringing order to Sullivan's world. His cabin, while not filthy, had clearly been maintained with utility rather than comfort in mind. She introduced small changes, rearranging furniture to maximize the fireplace's warmth, hanging curtains sewn from spare fabric to soften the windows, establishing proper places for books and papers rather than the haphazard stacks that had accumulated. Sullivan accepted these modifications without comment, though she occasionally caught him studying the changes with an expression that might have been approval. Their interactions remained largely practical, discussions of meals, supplies, or the girls' activities, but Victoria noticed he lingered longer at the dinner table each evening, sometimes even contributing to conversations beyond monosyllabic responses. A week into their arrangement, Victoria was hanging laundry on a line strung between pines when Sullivan approached, carrying a wooden crate. "Found these in the storage shed," he said, setting the crate down. "Thought the little ones might want them." Inside lay an assortment of children's treasures, wooden blocks, a small set of carved animals, a rag doll that had seen better days but could be easily restored, and several children's books with colorful illustrations. "These were your nieces and nephews' things?" Victoria asked gently. Sullivan nodded once, his expression guarded. "Been sitting gathering dust. No sense in that." Before she could respond, Emma appeared from around the cabin, immediately drawn to the mysterious crate. Her delighted exclamations quickly summoned her sisters, and within moments, all three girls were examining the newfound treasures with reverent hands. "Girls," Victoria prompted, "what do we say to Mr. Sullivan?" Three pairs of identical blue eyes turned upward. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan," they chorused with well-practiced synchronization. Sullivan cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "With gratitude. Just gathering dust," he repeated gruffly, but Victoria didn't miss the way his expression softened as Charlotte hugged the faded ragdoll to her chest. Later that evening, after the girls had been tucked into bed with their new treasures, Victoria found Sullivan at his desk, poring over mining ledgers with intense concentration. She placed a cup of coffee at his elbow, noting with satisfaction that he no longer startled at her presence, as he had in the early days. "The girls are thrilled with their gifts," she said, "especially Charlotte. She's named the doll Henrietta and is planning her wardrobe as we speak." Sullivan grunted, but the sound held no displeasure. "Good, they're getting use." Victoria hesitated, then pressed forward. "Your sister's children, what were their names?" For a moment she thought. She'd overstepped. Sullivan's shoulders tensed, and his pen stilled above the ledger. Just as she prepared to apologize for the intrusion, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "Joseph, Mary, William." He set down his pen. Joseph would be 20 now, Mary 18, William 16. Each name emerged with careful precision, as though rarely spoken aloud, but frequently remembered. "Do you ever hear from them?" Victoria asked softly. Sullivan shook his head. "Different states, different families. Letters came for a while, then stopped." He paused. "Their guardians thought it best, clean break." The unspoken pain behind that simple statement hung in the room. Victoria thought of her own girls, how inseparable they were, how their identical appearances mirrored their emotional connection. To be parted after losing their mother, it was unthinkable. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "That must have been very difficult." Sullivan met her eyes briefly, a flash of surprise crossing his features at the genuine sympathy in her voice. Then his gaze returned to the ledgers, a clear signal that the conversation had reached its conclusion. Victoria respected the boundary, retiring to her own cabin, where she found the girls sleeping peacefully, their new treasures arranged carefully on the small table between their beds. Charlotte clutched Henrietta the doll to her chest. Emma had positioned the wooden animals in a protective circle around her pillow, and Grace had fallen asleep with one of the illustrated books still open beside her. Looking at her daughters' peaceful faces, Victoria felt a wave of gratitude toward the taciturn miner. Whatever his reasons, whatever his past, Ethan Sullivan had provided a safe harbor when they most needed it. The awareness that this arrangement was temporary, a stepping stone to their true destination, lingered in the back of her mind. But for tonight, she allowed herself to simply be thankful for the present moment. Beyond the cabin windows, snow began to fall, the first gentle flakes of what would prove to be an early mountain winter. 3 months passed as winter transformed the mountain into a glistening wonderland. The temporary arrangement at Crescent Mine evolved into something neither Victoria nor Ethan had anticipated: a family. When spring's first buds appeared, Thomas Hargrove arrived unexpectedly, claiming renewed interest in Victoria now that his business faced difficulties. His offer came with conditions: Victoria alone, not her daughters. Ethan, overhearing, stepped forward. "Mrs. Blackwell and her daughters have a home here." His eyes met Victoria's. "If they choose it." That evening, after the girls slept, Victoria joined Ethan on the porch. "Did you mean what you said?" "Every word." He took her hand. "Not just employment anymore, Victoria. I'm asking for a family, you and the girls." Victoria smiled. "The girls voted this morning. It was unanimous." Their wedding was small, just family, including Copper the cat, who wore a ribbon for the occasion. Emma, Charlotte, and Grace each carried wildflowers and silver specimens, symbols of their new beginning. Sometimes life's greatest journeys begin with rejection, leading to destinations far better than imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.